Welcome to our Raw Material Ignorance Week, where we are finding our center wherever we are. I am Tavish Carduff here with our very own Jennifer Ketz. We are sitting at Jennifer's lake house, and if I can back up, it'll show you the lake behind us. It's the fourth week. It's more about the physical body. And let's just start with the question. Do you want to ask it?
Sure. What percentage of all there is to know do you know?
And that question is always a lot to breathe around. And for me, I like to think about it and then just remind myself how little I know about so many things. You work in real estate. I mean, how often does the idea of ignorance enter into your just daily life? Is there any kind of stuff that you...
Everything from law to people to situations to locations. Yes.
And so what happens when you encounter ignorance? You just learn?
Right.
You just open that space up and learn?
Well, you have to, and there's plenty of people who aren't comfortable, or myself included in certain situations, right? You run up against it. It doesn't usually end well. That's what it comes to.
So, usually when we find ourselves encountering a situation where we feel ignorant, like what you're describing, a legal situation where, say, like you have outside, something to do with an easement or something like that on your property. So you're going to go learn about it. If you waste time, and I say waste, but if you spend any time feeling dumb that you don't know, judging yourself for not having understood what you needed to understand before you ever got to it, putting yourself in a position of being angry or blaming or any of those sorts of things, then you stir up all this energy around the ignorance, but you don't solve anything.
Right. It blocks the next step. Be it within yourself, finding the answer for somebody, or even understanding what it is somebody's trying to say to you. It is a profession of, solving the next hurdle and the next hurdle for people.
It's a really great example for ignorance because every single situation has its own different set of problems. Every house you're going to I thought I'd seen it all, but here's a new one.
Yes.
And up here, we're in Michigan, townships and all kinds of little rules and regulations, which gets into the legalities of everything. Ignorance is such a part of our daily lives, of our own daily lives. But we spend so much time finding fault in the that we fail to recognize how prevalent it is in ourselves. And ignorance, just the word, it really puts a lot of negative energy, negative feelings, when ignorance is simply not knowing. I mean, that is the basic definition of ignorance. It's just not knowing. So in so many situations, for every human being, we're going to run into things that we don't know. What we have right now is a little phone in our hands with the opportunity to learn anything we need. Like, there's never been a more perfect time to allow ignorance to exist, because we can always learn what we need to know, and remember that so can anyone else. And let's just start with our own ignorance versus that of somebody else. Expectation. I mean, how many times in a day do you expect that somebody else should anything?
It's like we set up roadblocks in between ourselves and what it is we want. And I'm not sure if it really is like folks think that they know, or it's an energetic roadblock that we've put in between us and like really achieving what it is. I find that happens just a lot. Instead of reaching out and seeking information, just as there is a degree of shame. What happens if I can't afford it? What happens if they tell me no? What happens if they judge me in the process? And so I find that we that often we set up for ourselves, like these, I don't know, roadblocks in between you and your goal.
So when we do find ourselves holding expectations for others, or being bothered that they don't understand what we're trying to say or catch up fast enough, or know what we think they're supposed to know, then we do create this energy in the way of actually understanding. If we could just notice when somebody isn't getting it, take a breath, go back in a different way, that's going to clear the space, and you might have to go in a few times. You might have to clear something more than you think you should have to clear it to make it understood. But you have no idea what another person's raw material is. You don't know what they started with. You don't know what they know. You don't know how the words that you are saying might land on them. You have ideas and expectations and ideals about how things should be heard. But the way that actually goes is very, very different. And I think that's where ignorance itself is something to just breathe around. So this time around, we're talking about how do we use each pillar to help us in our lives. And I think that number one, we start with that idea that what we know is such a small fraction of everything there is to know. So if we can take that in and really look at, okay, my knowledge is this big, everything else is this big. I'm going to back up, I'm going to breathe a little bit, and I'm going to give room for everybody to catch up, or for me to learn, or whatever needs to happen, because otherwise we fill that space with anger and being bothered and frustration, impatience, all of those energies that just bluster and go nowhere and don't help the situation.
I love that exploration too, in terms of when we know what that feels like when it feels good. When we're curious about things that we're interested in, we know what that is. We explore in those ways. And, I'm just even thinking with the lake in the background, what a metaphor that is for what we can see and know and what's going on. There's this whole ecosystem that I know very little about, and I see the muskrat swimming by every once in a while, or the turtle doing its own thing, and don't really know. So sitting in front of a lake, it's easy to be like, oh, I'm a little curious about that. It's again, when you get into the interactions, even within your own self or interactions with other people, where you just have these assumptions that we should be able to do something, or we should be able to know something, instead of having the curiosity of allowing that exploration. That the judgment comes in and everything gets blacked up and everything shuts down. And
the things that naturally occur in our lives, oh, I see this all the time. That's not true of someone else's life. What they are seeing all the time is a different thing than what you are seeing all the time. And the way they interpret it and the way they hold it. So we all just have a completely different way of viewing the world, viewing ourselves in relation to the world, and operating in the world.
Yes. Even the incoming information from the most basic reaction is something that we all process in such a different way. Just to accept that from somebody else that, may have had some other trauma, even if it was slight, and just, fireworks, right? Didn't we just have the conversations around people? Some people are like, these are great, I enjoy it in all of these ways, not thinking about folks with PTSD, folks with, that can't, or even some of the things that they do to the environment or to nature or to the rest of the world. So
right. And depending on what has happened in your own life informs your opinion of something as simple as fireworks, or celebrating Independence Day at all now, or anything like that. you just reminded me on that day. My parents generally have a party, but it was a small affair this year. My dad's been sick, so it was just very small part of the family, not even all of the family. And so it was quiet. And my oldest daughter walked into the kitchen at one point and said, "Is everybody okay? It's really tense out there." And everybody else was like, "Huh?" You know, nobody else felt it as tense, but as someone who's been used to loud, obnoxious, you know, crazy parties, this seemed very different. So I could see, I mean, I guess my instinct was to be like, why would you think that? You know, and to be a little negative with it. Instead, I just really leaned into the fact that it felt that way to her and why it might feel that way to her.
Yes.
And I probably allowed that for her for the first time, maybe ever, instead of telling her how something was instead of what she thought. So, you know, it's never too late for a parent to figure out how their go-to responses maybe don't serve a situation too. The more we back up, the more we see things differently. And when we back up to the point where all we see is the energy, and we've been talking about that a little bit today, just energetic block, energetic clarity. You know, it doesn't matter what the situation is. When you're seeing a whole bunch of energy in something, it's a block. And when you're seeing, you know, energy being cleared, you can breathe more easily. And that's just probably the best way to tackle ignorance.
Yeah.
Figuring out a way to have respect for it, and that's practice in and of itself. To just take a breath, realize, okay, this person doesn't know this, and for yourself, know better and do better. And I think that's what we really wrestle with, because we get triggered. We get triggered so hard when other people don't know what we want them to know. But it plays a big part in just how we each handle and do all of the things that we do. We are ignorant of other people's motives unless we ask. And even when we ask, we're asking them to take an entire world in their brain and form some sentences with it that we can now interpret in a way that reflects this huge thing going on. I mean, it's just, it doesn't translate like that. So the more we sit back and realize that, the more we just breathe with another person and feel a rhythm and talk about a feeling or a tone more than specific words about should and can't and have to, we get a little better at understanding just universal laws, maybe understand the laws of man a little better, because ignorance is no excuse when it comes to not knowing the law, but our laws have gotten so complicated that even someone who's gone to school, an attorney, has to specialize. They can't know all the areas of law. I have a lawyer that I used to work for, and I remember this all of my life because, number one, it shows just her ability to own what she did know and let go of what she didn't, which is difficult in lawyers. But I had a domestic situation. She is a criminal defense attorney, and she said, "I wish I could help you, but I don't know shit about domestic." And it was just the honesty and the real, I know my lane, I know my area, and I am an expert in this area. But just because I am a lawyer doesn't mean that I'm going to go jump in and give you advice about an area that somebody else has specialized in.
Yes.
So even when it comes to specialized education, ignorance plays a huge part. It is the practice of law. It is the practice of medicine. Because there is no way to get it right. It is the practice of humanity. It is the practice of community. And it is the practice of our raw material that helps us have common space to just start to take ourselves down defensively enough to find those communication spaces, to allow the ignorance to exist, take a breath, and then clear the block.
I also, for today, experienced just the importance, too, of allowing other people to help you in terms of like what to do when, again, you have that energetic block. For whatever reason, for me today, that was just like the accumulation and trying to sort things out and just even figure out which plants, which is usually a joy to me, which plants go where. All of it just felt like, oh, I just don't know. And so like just accepting that, I think that people would identify with having trouble with that too, asking for help or in admitting like, yeah, I don't even know what's happening here.
Getting to any space where you feel overwhelmed. And especially when it comes kind of out of nowhere, you're handling things just fine, you're doing great, and then all of a sudden you turn around and there's a whole bunch to do and you kind of feel paralyzed and you can't do anything. You can't make a decision. It is a good time to bring someone else in or make a list, get back to what's important. Get back to a values list so that you can kind of understand where to put your energy. Because with ignorance, you never know what's around the corner. You never know what could come out of nowhere and disrupt your entire day, moment, life, at any time. So being prepared to not fight changes, but to be curious within them and to be prepared for whatever might be coming, takes away a lot of the fear, takes away a lot of the feeling unprepared, like you need to cover every eventuality in case, right? So many things can happen, and if you are covering every base in case, you are not only kind of energetically inviting negative things to happen, you are experiencing those negative things over and over. So take it to the ideal playground. Play around with the best ideas you can, but also be ready to, dial up what you need when you need it. How do I fix a lawnmower that I can barely even run? You can do that now. You can get on the internet, you can follow steps, you can breathe, you can exercise patience, and your ignorance then becomes knowledge. And what you didn't know now becomes something that you have struggled through, had emotions through, worked through, but it has become a part of you. And now it is knowledge. You take that breath. So we usually don't take the breath until the end. Breathe all the way through. Make that easy. Make it a part of the process instead of all of the anger and resistance and frustration. And
I love that you brought the emotion so much of what we feel around those things into it, that ignorance weeks, comes into emotion right afterward, because that is so often when there is learning to happen.
Absolutely.
It starts with, oh, I feel this, and it may be uncomfortable or happy or joyful or fearful or any of those things, and just being able to, I don't know, there's something about that transition that for me always feels like if I'm comfortable with my ignorance or someone else's, then I can get to processing the emotion that comes from that.
Yeah. And we will do that up until the point where we become triggered.
Yeah.
And once that trigger shows up, now we are unwilling to accept. That's when we say things like, no, you can't do this. This is unacceptable. You can't do that around me. I'm going to move myself if you continue to do what you're doing. But you can't do that, or how can you do that? And stopping right there just produces an energetic, icky space. So if you don't figure out how to clear that space, how to see past the why, or the, just the fact that you don't like it at all, and just let it be there as something you don't like, then it doesn't trap you. It doesn't trap you with your own feelings. You can sit in this little lovely house right next door to some judgy neighbors who don't like you based on sexuality. Sexuality alone. That is the one reason that the next door neighbors refuse to have anything to do here. And I'll cut that out if you want me to, but there they are with a beautiful house, a beautiful yard, they could just wave. They could just say hello. But their ignorance makes it so they sit in that house fearful, judgy, angry,
Yes.
looking for anyone to step across their property so they can come yell at them.
Yeah.
And what kind of life is that? What does that feel like? So it sucks that you sit in a house next door to people who are ignorant enough to not enjoy your amazing company.
Yeah.
But to allow them to be right there and to say, you know what, I wish you love. Like, I'm looking at your beautiful porch thinking, I hope you find peace and love.
Right. It's been such a lesson for me. And not only can I look at it in terms of feeling as though they are, or thinking of it in terms of their own ignorance of me, but I'm completely ignorant as to what brought them to that space either. You know, how many times have you read a book? You're brought through someone's story in a way that sometimes you can understand a perspective that you just would not have ever.
It's just,
it's a practice, so for sure, right?
Keeping you, absolutely. Ignorance itself, just handling it, being up against it, allowing it, breathing into it, part of the practice. And Ignorance Week 4 times a year gives us a chance to do just that right before we step into handling our emotions, which is next week.
I'm grateful for it. Yes.
So thank you, Jen, for being with us and letting me come stay at your gorgeous lake house. We will be back next week. Thank you.
Thank you.